I shouldn't have sat there, but the moment I did, the door locked behind me with a sound that didn't belong to a normal flight. It was too final. Too deliberate. I remember freezing with my hand still on the armrest, the soft leather cool under my fingers, the low hum of the engines vibrating through the floor like a warning I didn't understand yet. I had been rushing, of course I had. Running late, juggling my phone, my carry-on, my thoughts, trying to make a last-minute charter flight I could barely afford. The attendant had waved me forward without checking twice, and I didn't question it. I never questioned things when I was exhausted. That was my first mistake. The seat I chose was centered, wider than the others, facing slightly toward the aisle like it expected attention. I thought maybe I'd just gotten lucky. I thought maybe, for once, life had handed me something easy. Then I noticed the silence. Not the normal quiet of a small plane, but the kind of silence that feels watched. The kind that presses against your skin. There were only a handful of people on board, all dressed too sharp for a random flight, their eyes not curious, not annoyed, just aware. One of them leaned slightly toward me and said under his breath, "That seat is taken." I let out a nervous laugh, already shifting to stand. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize it." The voice didn't come from him. It came from behind me. Low. Controlled. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to take control of a room. Or a plane. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw him. He stepped into the cabin like he owned not just the aircraft, but the air inside it. Dark suit, perfectly fitted. No tie, just an open collar that somehow made him look even more dangerous, not less. His skin was pale, but not soft. There was something rough in the edges, like he didn't belong in clean places, but walked through them anyway. A faint line of ink disappeared beneath the collar of his shirt, tracing up his neck just enough to notice, just enough to wonder how far it went. His eyes found me immediately. Not scanning. Not questioning. Just landing. Like I had already been chosen. My heart stuttered. "I'm really sorry," I said quickly, standing halfway now, unsure if I should run. Or apologize again. "I didn't know this was," I said. "Sit." He took one step closer, and the entire cabin seemed to tighten around him. I sank back into the seat without thinking. Not because I wanted to, but because something in me understood that resisting would only make things worse. He stopped right beside me, close enough that I could catch the faint scent of something clean layered over something darker, something that didn't belong in airports or polite conversations. His gaze dropped briefly to the seat, then back to me. Assessing. Calculating. I swallowed. "I can move," I whispered, trying again, softer this time, like maybe that would make a difference. "I'll find somewhere else." A pause. Just long enough to make my chest tighten. Then he said it. Calm. Certain. Final. "You're not getting off." The words didn't sound like a threat. That was the worst part. They sounded like a fact. Like gravity. Like something already decided long before I ever stepped onto this plane. And suddenly, the door locking behind me didn't feel like an accident anymore. It felt like the beginning of something I wasn't supposed to survive alone. The plane began to move before I could say anything else, a slow, almost graceful roll that made my stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with altitude, and I realized with a sharp, quiet panic that whatever control I thought I had left had just disappeared with the runway beneath us. I gripped the edge of the seat, my fingers pressing into the leather as I tried to steady my breathing, counting silently the way I used to when things felt like they were slipping too fast to hold onto. 1, 2, 3. It did not help. Nothing about this felt normal. The man did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply took the seat across from me like the entire cabin had been arranged for that exact moment, crossing one leg over the other with a precision that felt practiced, controlled, intentional. Up close, the details became sharper. The faint shadow along his jaw like he had not bothered to shave for perfection, only for necessity. The ink along his neck, darker now under the cabin lights, disappearing beneath his collar like a secret he did not need to explain. His hands were still, resting lightly, but there was strength there, the kind that did not need to prove itself. I realized I had been staring and forced my eyes away, focusing instead on the small oval window beside me where the runway lights blurred into streaks as we gained speed. I think there has been a mistake, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, which surprised me. Maybe fear did that. Maybe it forced you to sound stronger than you were. My ticket, I am supposed to be on a different flight. He did not respond immediately. He just watched me, and it was not the kind of watching I was used to. It was not casual curiosity or polite attention. It felt like being read. Like every word I said was being weighed for something I could not see. Your name, he said finally, his voice just as controlled as before. Not a question. A command dressed like one. I hesitated for half a second, then answered anyway. Ava. Ava Bennett. He repeated it once under his breath, like he was testing how it sounded, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a slim black phone. 1 tap. 2. His eyes flicked across the screen, and something shifted in his expression, subtle but unmistakable. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. My chest tightened. That is interesting, he said quietly. Because according to this, you're exactly where you are supposed to be. I shook my head immediately. No, that cannot be right. I booked a commercial flight out of JFK. Economy. Last minute. I stopped myself, realizing how that sounded, how out of place I was proving myself to be. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like he had expected that answer. You would never be here, he finished for me. Heat rushed to my face, but I did not look away this time. No, I would not. A brief silence stretched between us, filled only by the steady roar of the engines as the plane lifted higher, pressing me gently back into the seat. The city below disappeared into a scatter of lights, distant and unreachable. He leaned forward just enough that I felt it, that shift in the air between us. And yet, he said, his voice lower now, quieter, your name was cleared before you even stepped on board. My pulse spiked. Cleared by who? Another pause. This one heavier. That, he said, settling back again as if the conversation had already tilted in his favor, is what I intend to find out. I swallowed hard, the realization settling in piece by piece, cold and unavoidable. I had not just taken the wrong seat. I had been placed in it. And whatever this was, whatever invisible line I had crossed without knowing, I was already too far in the air to turn back. The words stayed with me longer than they should have, looping in my head in a way that made it hard to think straight, like my mind kept trying to reject them and failing every time, and I realized I was gripping the armrest so tightly my fingers had started to ache. But I could not bring myself to let go because it felt like the only thing keeping me anchored to something real. I forced a breath in, slow, controlled, the way I had learned to do when anxiety crept in at the edges, and shifted slightly in the seat, trying to remind myself that I was still in control of my body, even if everything else had already slipped out of my hands. You think someone put me here on purpose, I said, the words coming out quieter than I intended, but steady enough to hold. His eyes did not leave mine. I do not think, he replied, his tone calm, almost detached. I confirm. Something about the certainty in that sentence made a chill run down my spine. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated. Just precise. Like he did not deal in guesses. I shook my head again, more to convince myself than him. That does not make sense. I am not anyone important. I do not have money, I do not have connections, I barely made rent last month. There is nothing about me worth planning something like this. The corner of his mouth shifted slightly, that almost smile again, but there was no warmth in it. You are assuming value is always obvious, he said. It is not. I opened my mouth to respond, then stopped, because I did not have an answer for that, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything he had said so far. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane leveled out, the steady hum of the engines smoothing into something almost hypnotic, and for a brief second, everything felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life by mistake and had not found the exit yet. A flight attendant approached quietly, placing a glass of water on the table beside me without meeting my eyes, her movements precise, practiced, like she had done this 100 times before and knew better than to linger. I glanced at her, searching for something human, something normal, but she was already gone before I could speak. He noticed. Of course he did. No one here will interfere, he said, as if answering a question I had not asked out loud. You're safe. The word safe landed strangely. Not comforting. Not reassuring. Just stated. I let out a small breath, my gaze drifting back to the window where the sky had turned into a deep, endless blue, the kind that made you feel very small very quickly. Safe from what? I asked, almost before I could stop myself. Another pause. This one different. Measured. He leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the armrest, a small movement that somehow carried more weight than anything else he had done so far. That depends, he said, his voice quieter now, on who arranged your boarding. My stomach tightened again, sharper this time, because the way he said it made it clear that whoever that person was, they were not someone I would want to meet at the end of this flight. I looked back at him, really looked this time, at the details I had tried not to focus on before, the faint scar near his knuckle, the way his suit sat perfectly, but still allowed for movement, the subtle tension in his posture that suggested he was never truly relaxed, not even here, not even at 40,000 feet above the ground. And if you find out? I asked. His gaze held mine for a long second, and something in it shifted, just slightly, like a line being drawn that I could not see but could definitely feel. Then I decide what happens next, he said. Simple. Final. My throat felt dry, but I reached for the glass of water anyway, my hand steady enough to not give away how fast my heart was beating, and as I took a small sip, one thought settled in with quiet clarity, heavier than fear, heavier than confusion. Whatever had started the moment I sat in the seat, it was not random. And the man sitting across from me was not just trying to understand it. He was already in control of it. The longer I sat there, the more the air inside the cabin began to feel different, heavier somehow, like every second that passed was pulling me deeper into something I could not see but could definitely feel closing in around me. And I realized I was no longer thinking about getting off the plane, I was thinking about what would be waiting if I did. I set the glass of water down carefully, the faint clink against the polished surface louder than it should have been, and forced myself to meet his gaze again, because looking away felt like giving something up, even if I could not name what. You keep saying someone arranged this, I said, my voice quieter now but more focused, like fear had sharpened into something else. But I do not know anyone who could do that. I work 2 jobs. I go home. That is it. There is no one pulling strings in my life. He studied me for a moment, not interrupting, not correcting, just watching the way I spoke, the way I held myself, like he was comparing what I said to something else entirely. Everyone has a connection, he said finally. Most people just do not know where it leads. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. That sounds like something you tell people to make them feel less in control. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, just slightly. Control is not something I give away, he replied. The simplicity of it made my chest tighten again, because I believed him, not because of what he said, but because of how easily he said it. I shifted in my seat, the leather creasing softly beneath me, and glanced once more toward the front of the cabin, where one of the men in suits stood near the cockpit door. His posture relaxed, but alert in a way that made it clear he was not just there for decoration. Everything about this place operated on a different set of rules, and I was the only one who had not been given them. So what happens now? I asked, the question coming out before I could stop it, because I needed something, any kind of direction that made this feel less like falling. He did not answer right away. Instead, he reached forward and adjusted something on the table between us, a small, almost absent movement that still carried that same controlled precision, then leaned back again, his gaze never leaving mine. Now, he said slowly, we wait. The words settled into the space between us, and I felt my stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with turbulence or altitude. Waiting meant uncertainty. Waiting meant something was coming. I swallowed, my throat dry again despite the water. For what? His eyes flicked briefly toward the window, then back to me. For whoever believes you were supposed to land, he said. A cold weight settled in my chest, heavier than before, because the way he said it made it clear that wherever this plane was going, it was not where I had planned to be. I leaned back slightly, the hum of the engines filling the silence that followed, steady and constant, like a reminder that we were still moving forward whether I understood it or not. My mind raced, trying to connect pieces that did not fit together, searching for a name, a face, anything that could explain why someone would go to this level of effort just to put me here, but there was nothing, just empty space where answers should have been. "I think you are wrong," I said finally, even though the words felt weaker now, less certain. "I think this is just a mistake." He held my gaze for a long second, and for the first time since I had seen him, there was something almost unreadable there, something deeper than control, something that felt like it had already moved past the question entirely. "I do not make mistakes about things like this," he said quietly. The certainty in his voice did not rise, did not push, but it landed harder than anything else he had said so far, and as I sat there, surrounded by a world I did not belong to, one thought became impossible to ignore. If this was not a mistake, then I was exactly where someone wanted me to be, and the man sitting across from me was the only reason I was still trying to understand why. Waiting felt heavier than fear because fear at least gave you something to react to, something to push against, but this was different. This was sitting still while something unseen moved toward you, and I could feel it in the way the air stayed too quiet, in the way no one else on the plane spoke unless spoken to, like even sound had rules here I did not understand. I shifted again, trying to release the tension building in my shoulders, and glanced down at my hands, noticing for the first time how tightly they were clasped together, my knuckles pale against my skin, and I forced them to relax, one finger at a time. Like I was reminding myself that I still had control over something, even if it was small. "How long is this flight?" I asked, because time suddenly mattered in a way it had not before. If I knew how long I had, maybe I could think, maybe I could plan, maybe I could figure out how to step out of this before it closed completely. "For hours and 30 minutes, he answered without hesitation, like he already knew I would ask, like everything about this had been anticipated before I even opened my mouth. I glanced toward the window again, the sky stretching endlessly, no landmarks, no sense of direction, just distance, and it hit me then that I had no idea where we were going, not really, not in any way that mattered. "Where are we landing?" I asked, turning back to him. A brief pause, then, "Not where you expected." My stomach tightened again, sharper this time. "That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters right now." His tone did not change, but something about it closed the question before I could push further, like there were boundaries here I had not seen, but had just run into anyway. I exhaled slowly, leaning back into the seat, the leather warm now under my back, and let my head rest for just a second, closing my eyes as I tried to gather my thoughts, to line them up in a way that made sense, but every path I followed led back to the same point. The same realization that nothing about this had been random, that every step I had taken to get here had been guided by something I had never noticed. A soft shift in the air made me open my eyes again. He had moved slightly, not much, just enough that his arm rested along the edge of the seat, his fingers relaxed, but still, like even at rest there was a kind of readiness in him that never fully turned off. I watched him for a moment before I could stop myself, trying to understand how someone could sit so still and still feel like the most dangerous thing in the room without doing anything at all. "You said I am safe," I said quietly, the words coming out more carefully now, chosen instead of rushed. "That means you know what I would not be safe from." His gaze held mine, steady, unreadable, and for a second I thought he might not answer, that he might let the question hang there unanswered like the others, but then he spoke. "It means I know enough," he said. "Not everything. Not nothing. Enough." The words settled into me differently, not comforting, but grounding in a way I did not expect, because it meant there was something real behind all of this, something he could see even if I could not. I swallowed, my throat still dry, and nodded slightly, more to myself than to him, because arguing against that felt pointless now, like trying to deny gravity while already falling. The cabin lights dimmed a little more, the quiet hum of the plane steady and constant, and I became aware of how far we were from everything I knew, how completely removed I was from the version of my life that had existed just a few hours ago. The version where the biggest problem I had was making it to a flight on time. I let out a small breath, barely more than air, and looked at him again, really looked this time, not just at the details, but at the space around him, the way people adjusted without being told, the way everything seemed to orbit his presence without question. If someone wanted me on this plane, I said slowly, the thought forming as I spoke it, then they knew you would be here. His eyes did not flicker, did not shift, but something in the stillness of his expression confirmed it before he even spoke. Yes, he said. And just like that, the last piece I had been trying to ignore settled into place. This was not about me being in the wrong place. This was about me being placed in his. The confirmation settled into me slowly, not like a shock but like something colder, something that spread through my chest and made it harder to breathe the longer I thought about it. And I realized I had stopped trying to understand why and started trying to understand what came next, because whatever this was, it had already moved past the point where I could pretend it was just a coincidence. I looked down at my hands again, forcing myself to stay grounded, to stay present, because letting my thoughts spiral was not going to help me here, not with him watching me the way he was, like every reaction mattered. So I am not the target, I said quietly, more to test the thought than to state it. His gaze sharpened slightly, just enough to tell me I had stepped onto something closer to the truth. No, he said. A small breath left me, one I had not realized I was holding, but it did not bring relief, not really, because if I was not the target, then I was something else, something placed, something used. Then I am what? I asked, the words slower now, more careful. He did not answer immediately, and the silence that followed felt deliberate, like he was deciding how much I was allowed to know. His fingers moved once against the armrest, that same subtle motion I had started to recognize, like a shift in thought made visible for just a second. A message, he said finally. The word landed heavier than anything else so far. Not because it was loud, but because it made sense in a way I did not want it to. I shook my head instinctively. That does not make sense either. Why me? I do not know anyone connected to you. I would not even know where to start. Exactly, he replied, his voice calm, almost analytical now. That is what makes it effective. I stared at him, trying to follow the logic, trying to see it the way he did, but all I could feel was the weight of it pressing down on me, the idea that someone had looked at my life, at everything I was, and decided I was useful for something I had never agreed to. The cabin shifted slightly then, a subtle dip that made the glass on the table tremble for a second, and I felt it immediately, that familiar tightening in my chest, that quick, sharp rise of something I had worked hard to keep under control for years. My fingers curled again, my breath catching before I could stop it. Not now. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself, but the movement of the plane, the enclosed space, the sense of being trapped with no clear way out, it all pressed in at once, too fast, too close. I inhaled again, but it came out uneven, shallow, not enough. Ava. His voice cut through it, lower now, closer, and I realized without opening my eyes that he had moved, that the space between us had shifted. Breathe. Simple. Direct. Not soft, not harsh. Controlled. I focused on the word, on the way he said it, and forced myself to follow it, drawing in air slowly, holding it, letting it out the same way, again and again, until the tightness in my chest eased just enough for me to think again. When I opened my eyes, he was closer than before, not invading, not overwhelming, just present in a way that felt intentional. His gaze was steady, watching, not for weakness, but for response. You are not in danger here, he said quietly. Not with me. The words were not comforting in the way most people would say them, but there was something in the certainty, in the lack of hesitation, that made them settle differently, not as reassurance, but as fact. I swallowed, nodding once as I steadied my breathing, my pulse slowly coming back under control, and leaned back slightly into the seat again, the tension in my shoulders easing just a fraction. You say that like it is absolute, I said, my voice still quieter than before but more stable now. It is, he replied. No hesitation. No doubt. I studied him for a moment, really studied him, And for the first time since this started, I noticed something beneath the control, something quieter, something that did not belong to the same cold precision as everything else. Not softness. Not exactly. But intention. Then whoever sent me, I said slowly. The thought forming clearer now. They knew I would end up here, with you, not just on this plane. His gaze held mine, unblinking, and the answer came just as steady as everything else. Yes. And as the plane continued forward through the endless sky, one realization settled deeper than all the others. I was not just part of the situation anymore. I was the reason it had started. The realization did not hit all at once. It unfolded slowly, piece by piece, until it became impossible to ignore, and I could feel the shift inside me, the moment where fear stopped being the only thing driving me and something else took its place. Something sharper, more focused, because if I was the reason this had started, then I needed to understand how far it went. I sat a little straighter, my breathing steadier now, my mind catching up to everything he had said, replaying it, testing it, looking for cracks. If I am the message, I said carefully, watching him as closely as he had been watching me, then someone expects you to react. His expression did not change, but the silence that followed told me I was getting closer. They expect a response, I continued, the words coming faster now as the logic built. That means they are watching, or they will be. They need to know what you do with me. His gaze held mine, steady, unreadable, but there was something there now, something quieter, like acknowledgement without confirmation. Possibly, he said. Not denial. Not agreement. Just enough. I let out a slow breath, my fingers uncurling completely now as I leaned back slightly, the tension shifting into something more controlled, more deliberate. So what you do next matters more than anything else, I said. This time, there was a pause before he answered, longer than the others, and I could feel it, the weight of whatever calculation was happening behind that calm exterior. Yes, he said finally. Simple. Certain. I nodded once, more to myself than to him, because that meant something very specific, something that changed everything about my position here. I was not just caught in the middle. I was part of the equation. The plane hummed steadily around us, the soft vibration grounding in a way that almost felt unreal compared to the conversation unfolding in the quiet space between us, and I glanced once more toward the window, the sky endless, the world below completely out of reach. There was no stepping out of this. Not anymore. I looked back at him, really meeting his eyes this time without hesitation. Then you cannot just let me go when we land, I said. It was not a question. It was the only conclusion that made sense. Something in his gaze shifted, just slightly, like a line had been crossed that neither of us could uncross now. No, he said. The words settled into me, heavy but not unexpected. I felt it, the moment where my options narrowed, not into panic, but into clarity. Because if you do, I continued, my voice steady now in a way that surprised even me, whoever sent me will know you either do not care, or you missed something. He watched me for a long second, and this time there was no hiding it, no subtlety in the shift of his expression. Interest. Not the kind that fades. The kind that locks in. And what do you think I should do? He asked, his voice quieter now, more focused, like the question was not casual, not rhetorical, but directed. I hesitated for just a fraction of a second, feeling the weight of that question, because answering it meant stepping further into something I had never chosen, but was already part of anyway. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. You keep me where you can see me, I said. Where they cannot reach me, and where you can control what happens next. The word control hung there, deliberate, chosen, and I did not look away as I said it. His gaze held mine, unbroken, and for a moment the entire cabin felt like it had narrowed to just the two of us, everything else fading into the background. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded once. That was already the plan, he said. And, just like that, something inside me shifted again, not fear this time, not confusion, but the quiet, undeniable understanding that whatever came next, I was not leaving his world anytime soon. The shift in him was subtle, but I felt it, The way the air seemed to settle differently after his words, like something unspoken had just been agreed on without either of us needing to say it out loud, and I realized I was no longer just reacting to him. I was starting to anticipate him, to read the small changes in his posture, the quiet pauses between his sentences, the way control for him was not about force, but about certainty. I exhaled slowly, leaning back into the seat again, my body finally starting to match the steadiness my mind had been forcing, and for the first time since I stepped onto this plane, I did not feel like I was about to fall apart. I felt aware. "So we wait," I said quietly, repeating his earlier words, but this time they meant something different, something heavier, something shared. He inclined his head slightly, not quite a nod, but enough to confirm it. The engines continued their low, constant hum, the kind that faded into the background if you let it, but now it felt like a countdown, each second carrying us closer to whatever was waiting on the ground. I glanced toward the front of the cabin again, noticing the way one of the men shifted slightly, his hand brushing near his jacket as if responding to something I could not hear, and it made me wonder how much of this was already in motion beyond what I could see. "They're expecting something specific," I said, more to organize my thoughts than to question him. "Not just any reaction. Something that tells them they got your attention." His gaze remained on me steady, but there was a new focus there now, sharper, more engaged. "Yes," he said. I nodded slowly, the pieces continuing to fall into place, each one making the picture clearer and more complicated at the same time. "Then doing nothing is not an option," I continued. "Because silence can be read as weakness. Or indifference." A brief pause. "Then, correct." I swallowed, my eyes drifting once more to the window, where the sky had darkened slightly, the deep blue fading toward something closer to night, and I wondered how much time had passed without me noticing. How far we had already traveled from the version of my life that had existed just hours ago. "And doing too much too quickly could mean they learn something you do not want them to know," I added, my voice softer now, more thoughtful. This time, his response was not immediate. He studied me, really studied me, like he was reassessing something, recalibrating. "You understand faster than most," he said. It was not praise. It was observation. I let out a small breath, not sure how to respond to that, because I was not sure if understanding this situation was something to be proud of or something to be afraid of. "I do not think I had a choice," I said quietly. His gaze held mine for a moment longer, then shifted briefly toward the window before returning, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, more deliberate. "Choice is often an illusion," he said. "Timing is not." The words lingered, heavier than they sounded, and I felt them settle somewhere deeper, because they made sense in a way that was hard to ignore. Everything about this felt timed, planned, positioned. I straightened slightly, my focus sharpening again. "Then they are waiting for you to make the first move," I said. "But not immediately. They want to see if you hesitate." His eyes did not flicker, but I could feel it, the shift in attention, the way the conversation had moved from me being the unknown variable to me being part of the strategy. "And what would hesitation tell them?" he asked. I held his gaze, not looking away now. "That you are not sure what I mean yet," I said. "Which means they still have the advantage." Silence followed, thicker this time, charged with something I could not quite name, and for a moment, the entire plane felt suspended in it, like even the engines had quieted just to listen. Then, slowly, he leaned back again, his expression settling into that controlled calm I was starting to recognize as something more than just composure. "Then we will not hesitate," he said. The certainty in his voice was absolute, but this time, it did not just feel like control. It felt like a decision that included me, whether I had chosen it or not. And as the plane carried us forward through the darkening sky, I realized something that should have terrified me more than it did. I was no longer just trying to survive this. I was part of what came next. The certainty in his voice should have made me feel smaller, like everything had already been decided without me, but instead it did something I did not expect. It steadied me, like finally understanding the rules of a game I had been thrown into without warning, and I realized that fear had started to change shape, not disappearing, but becoming something sharper, something I could actually use. I sat there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around us again, the hum of the engines constant, grounding, and I became aware of how different everything felt compared to just an hour ago. How the version of me who had rushed through an airport without thinking would not even recognize the person sitting here now, measuring words, reading silence, calculating outcomes at 40,000 feet above the ground. Then you need to show them something, I said finally, breaking the silence, my voice steady, deliberate. His eyes shifted to me immediately, focused, like he had been waiting to see where I would go next. Not everything, I added, choosing each word carefully, but enough to make them believe you are already ahead of them. A small pause followed, not empty this time, but full, like something was being weighed, considered. And what would that look like? He asked. His tone had changed again, not losing control, but inviting precision, like this was no longer just his decision, but a conversation he intended to see through. I took a breath, letting my thoughts settle into something clear. It means you act like I am exactly where you want me, I said. Not a problem. Not a mistake. An asset. The word felt strange coming from me, but it fit in a way nothing else did. His gaze did not break, but I saw it, that slight shift again, that quiet recognition that I was no longer just reacting, I was thinking inside the same space he was. If they believe that, I continued, then they cannot tell if their plan worked, or if you turned it into something else. Silence stretched between us, heavier now, but not tense, more like a line being drawn, something final taking shape in the space between what was happening and what would happen next. He leaned back slightly, his fingers resting against the armrest again, that same controlled stillness returning, but different this time, more intentional, more defined. You are suggesting we change the narrative, he said. I am suggesting you do what you already do, I replied, holding his gaze without hesitation. Control it. The word landed differently now, not something imposed, but something understood. And for a moment, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath again, like everything in this space recognized the shift that had just happened. His eyes stayed on mine for a long second, and then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded once. Not agreement. Not approval. Confirmation. Then that is what we will do, he said. The finality in his voice was absolute, but this time it did not feel like something closing in around me. It felt like something being set into motion. I exhaled quietly, leaning back into the seat as the weight of that settled in, the understanding that whatever this was, it had just changed direction, and I was no longer just along for it, I was part of it. The cabin lights dimmed further, the sky outside now fully dark, the reflection in the window showing only faint outlines of movement inside, and I caught a glimpse of myself for a second, my posture different, my expression steadier. Like somewhere between the moment I sat in the seat and now, something in me had shifted into place. There is one more thing, I said after a moment, my voice quieter now but no less certain. His gaze returned to me instantly. Whoever sent me, I continued, they are not just testing you. A pause. They are trying to see what you protect. The words lingered, heavier than anything else I had said so far, and I watched him closely, because this time I wanted to see if anything broke through that control, even for a second. It did not. Not visibly. But something changed. Subtle. Almost invisible. Enough. Then they will learn, he said quietly, his voice lower now, more deliberate than before, that they chose the wrong way to find out. The calm certainty in that sentence settled over everything, and as I sat there, surrounded by a world I had never belonged to, I understood something with a clarity that left no room for doubt. I had made one mistake. And now I was no longer outside his world. I was under it.